Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Lessons from Terrible Students. As always, we are the Terrible Students. My name's Jeremy. That's Sarah. Sarah, say hello.
Hey, everybody.
So, on today's episode, we are talking about another case study, but to make it a little different, we're not talking about a specific case. We're talking about something that Lumius does in all of our cases, essentially to all of our projects. And that is making sure that our audience is represented in all of our assets and all of our voiceovers and all of the other little things that go into learning. So we're going to dive deep into representation and learning. But before we do all of that, as always, this podcast is brought to you by Lumius. At Lumius, we are your partner in learning. So, as I said before our little intro, today we're going to be talking about representation in learning. So, I wanted to kind of intro that by saying how we do that and what kind of our best practice is to make sure that we get this right. So, what representation in learning is for Lumius is to make sure that all of our characters and our storytelling elements, all of our assets, all of our B footage, all of our stock footage, all of our stock images, all those kind of things. We want to make sure that they are as close as possible to the actual audience that we are training as we can get them. Obviously, there's going to be some wiggle room there depending on what we can find on stock image sites and what's available in our development tools. But we want to make sure that we can get them as close as possible to our actual audience. And the way that we do that is we do a deep dive into our audience analysis at the beginning of our project. And we say, okay, what does our audience look like? What do they dress like? What's, if the company has a demographics, what are the demographics? Are they business casual? Are they casual? Are they wearing suits all the time? So all of these questions are questions that we ask very early in the project to make sure that we understand, so that when we're creating assets and things like that, that we're matching those assets as close as possible to our learners. And there are a few reasons why we do that. We'll get to that in just a second. But I wanted to pause there for a minute because Sarah, I feel like you're the one that has a lot of these conversations with them. I know that I do when I start going into the theming discussion and stuff too, but a lot of times you're in those initial conversations with the client.
So it's really just, like Jeremy mentioned, a part of our standard operating procedure. When we are doing an analysis or even just opening up a conversation to start a project, we really like to know who our audience is, and we want to know everything about them, right? We want to know, like he mentioned, are these field guys? Are they wearing vests? Are they working in a business office? Do they need to be business casual? And just want to make sure that we are being inclusive to our audience, and that's really important. And so we do that at the beginning of every project, and we continue that conversation throughout. And sometimes the folks we're working with are very passionate and aware of it, and so they are right alongside us, calling things out for us, being like, hey, this would be great if you changed this, because that's more like the folks who are taking this training. And sometimes if we're working with an organization who doesn't have a lot of experience building training, it's not necessarily something they think about all the time. So, just top of mind for us, and a continued conversation throughout the analysis and even the development of our content.
Yeah, and just to give you an example, so we've done some safety videos and things like that for various field technicians, or essentially people that worked outside. So a lot of what we're talking about in that point is, what do these folks need to be wearing? Like, we don't want to put them out there in a 3-piece suit, because we know that our audience, the people that are actually working out there, they're not going to be working out there in a 3-piece suit and loafers. So we want to make sure that, especially when it's something like safety training, you want to make sure they've got on the correct boots, the correct gloves, safety glasses when they're supposed to wear safety glasses. that type of thing, that goes into representation. But we also want to make sure that we see a diverse amount of individuals that are out there, because most of the time, the people that are working in these outdoor environments, that audience is a diverse audience. So we want to make sure that we've got, a wide range of quote unquote actors. They're really just models
Characters.
on the screen, but
Yeah.
still, we want to make sure that it's not always the same model over and over and over again, because that gets boring. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
storytelling piece where if we're using a single model, then we can make sure that he's in, all of the scenes, but the accompanying cast needs to be varying shapes, sizes, colors, and all kind of things, just to make it
Ages.
visual. Yeah, ages,
Yeah.
exactly, just to make it visually interesting. If everybody on the screen looks exactly the same, it gets boring very quick.
Yeah. Exactly. Just like, we would do everything, right? An analysis as far as making sure it lines up with how it's supposed to. And it's as realistic as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And even, everything that I'm referencing right now is primarily for video or e-learning, something like that. But even when you're going into just voiceover, you want to make sure you get your voiceover actor to be as close to your audience as possible as well. You don't always want to use the same voiceover actor if you're constantly developing stuff for different audiences. Like, there is a need to change your voiceover actor depending on who you're talking to. So
Yep.
who is my audience going to listen to the most? This voice or this voice? It's not which voice do I personally like better. It's who do I think my audience will listen to and retain the knowledge from the most.
Receptive.
Exactly.
Yeah, agreed. And we have at Lumias, we have such a great array of different voice actors that we work with. Just a great wide selection and options for our customers. And I know they appreciate that. And again, that's a part of our development process, right? So Jeremy was talking about the safety training we're building. We're aligning on the characters, we're aligning on their outfits, we're aligning on all that, and then we send a sample of narration options. And if we were to work with you and do a project with you, you do the same thing. You go through our sample audio and see which one, is there one that resonates the most? Is it closely aligned to the character that we've all chosen to use to represent our learning? So.
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways to look at it, because there are studies and learning sciences that say, do a female voice versus a male voice, or do
Were you talking about that, about the GPS thing?
Yeah. So they're
I think that's cool. I didn't know that.
a couple of years ago, I looked this up because I read it. I don't even remember the article I read it in, but a couple of years ago, there was a study done to figure out which type of voice do the majority of people listen to more favorably. So who would we rather listen to? So a male or female voice. And the majority of the population would rather listen to a female voice than a male voice. So that's why back in the day, when you used to buy a separate GPS system, I don't think anybody does that anymore, but that shows how old I am.
What
Back
was
in
it
the
called?
day, when you used to buy a separate GPS system, it came defaulted to a female voice. That's why Apple has made Siri a female voice. That's why Alexa is a female voice. That's why all of these different talking AIs, they're all female, because there are studies and science behind. We are more likely to listen favorably. Whether or not we'll actually take the advice given, that's a separate study. But essentially, which voice would be less annoying to listen to for longer periods of time is a female voice. And that's where it comes from. So that's why typically my default is to say, okay, if it's a learning or anything like that, I'm defaulting to a female voice, just because that's what people are used to with all of these other tools out there with Siri and
Yeah.
GPS and stuff like that. You have to manually change it off of female voice.
I was gonna say I have mine switched to a lovely British male voice. That's what I like to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, if you like the accents, you like the accent.
Yeah.
That's always
Preference, right? Audience.
that's right.
Depends.
And that's the key, right? You have to manually change that setting. Like that's not
Yes.
something. So when you look at something that comes default, that's typically what the company thinks is going to be the best experience.
Yeah.
So that tells you something right there. When all of these companies are thinking, okay, we're going female voice first. There's science behind that. Like there's a reason they chose that, and it wasn't just because they wanted to. Like there
Somebody
was science behind it of why all of these companies went with a female voice. And I don't think I was about to say I haven't changed any of mine, but I leave all of mine off. Like I don't. My GPS is muted. I don't use.
Jeremy doesn't want to hear
I don't
anybody's
want to hear
voice.
anybody.
Okay?
I don't want to hear.
That tracks. That's funny.
So, but yeah, so I mean that it all goes back to what works best with the audience. We're not taking our preconceived biases. We're not taking our preferences into this learning. We as learning professionals need to understand that we are not developing this training for us. It doesn't matter what I want the character to look like. As much as I want this character to be weird and kooky looking, that doesn't matter. What only thing that matters is what's going to work for the audience. What's going to help them retain the information after they leave the classroom or after they close the course or finish watching the video, whatever the deliverable may be. What is the best way to help them retain this information? We know as learning professionals we're already up against it with with the learning curves and the forgetting curves and all of this other science. We know that it's already very, very hard to get people to retain the information. So all of these little tips and tricks that we can use to help people buy into this training, we need to be using it. And this is one. Representation is something that we need to make sure that we're using, because that's one more thing. If you have somebody that just does not see themselves in the training, then be it subconsciously or consciously, they're going to think, well, this training is just not for me. I don't need to listen to it. And it's
Tune out.
yeah, they're just going to completely walk away with nothing. So it's just one more easy step we can do, because you're creating those characters anyway. So
Yeah.
it's no additional effort on our part to make sure that these things are matching the audience. So, excuse me.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, at Lumius, we incorporate it as a step in our development process always, and it will always be there, and it's important for us.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring this up at the closer to the end of the episode. This could be, I guess, a hot topic nowadays with things that are going on. I don't view this as a controversial topic, because I don't think it's political in any way. I don't think it's something that is on one side of the political spectrum or the other. Really, the only thing that I'm looking at this point is, how do I make something that my learners and my audience will be more likely to enjoy.
Yep.
So we're not forcing anything. We're not, changing anything that wouldn't already be that way. It's just we're making sure that everything matches who we're talking to. And
yes. Yep. Agreed. Regardless of what's going on, if you're a good developer and you are building your content to accommodate your audience, which is number one, then you're keeping this as a conscious part of your development process.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do. And that's, we have to address the elephant in the room, right? Like there's a ton of talk out there about inclusion and representation and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, what really matters is ensuring that your learners learn what you're trying to teach them. And that's hard enough. So any small changes that I can do to help them through that, I'm going to do it. Like, to me, it's not anything more than that. It's just making sure that we can try to get to our learners any way possible. So that's kind of where we approach it from. And we do this with every single project that we do. It's part of our audience analysis. It's just built into our process. It's something that we've always done. That's why, again, we typically try to highlight one specific project when we do these case studies. I went back through and looked to see if there was one that we did this more than any other one. Fortunately for us as a company, unfortunately for this podcast, I couldn't find one where we did this more than any other one, because we literally do it for everything. I mean, I don't think there's been a single project that I've worked on for Lumius where this wasn't a relatively large topic of conversation early, and then it has always gotten positive feedback from those additional reviewers. So our stakeholders are in this conversation with us and making these decisions with us. And then inevitably we get additional reviewers added on late in the review cycle, right?
Yeah.
But then typically one of the biggest comments we get is, I like how these models and these assets match our audience, and how we don't have to now go back and change it all to make sure that our learners are represented in here, because we had already taken that step. We baked it into our process. So I think every time that we hear that, it just kind of verifies what we're doing. So
for sure. And I think it's also part of this. We did this podcast today to kind of lay the foundation. We've got some good conversations coming down the pipeline. We can't ignore what's going on around us and how it affects our business personally as a learning and development company who builds content for companies. And despite what is happening, it's always going to be important to us, and something that we include in our process. And we are going to have our awesome guest during our next podcast who's going to join us again. So if you guys, enjoy this conversation, or you are, curious about how companies can continue to be inclusive and keep that as important part of their culture, I think you're really going to enjoy our next podcast with Ali. We're going to bring him back, and he is at the forefront of the DEI conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we at Lumius, we do leadership training. We do, I hate this term, but soft skills training, stuff like that. Yeah. So essentially, it's okay. How do we go forward in this new landscape? Like, what is next steps? What does it look like? So I think Ali will have some fantastic insights, essentially, about how we navigate forward, how we, do we need to make changes to how we process, this type of training? Do we need to change the vernacular? Like, what do we need to do going forward to make sure that our learners are still learning what they need to know in this new landscape? So yeah, I think that's it. And I will say we're going to keep it as non-political as possible. We're not going to be delving into either side of the political argument. That's not what we're here to do. But essentially what we're here to do is talk about how we as learning professionals go forward in this new landscape, because things have changed. We can't deny that. So essentially we're going to talk to Ali and say, okay, he's on the front lines of it. So what are you seeing? What does it look like from your experience, and how does this change not only what the DEI landscape is, but what the leadership training looks like, and those kind of
and how companies can continue to honor what's important to them. And I keep saying culture, but I think it's important, right? A company that places importance on culture is inclusive. Exactly. So exactly. How can we guide our customers in the learning area and continue that energy around being inclusive and making sure everyone's represented, and doing it in a way that is the best way forward?
Exactly. Yeah, because we are for better or worse, and sometimes I can't believe this, but we are part of that HR apparatus. So this does,
Yeah.
learning and development for most companies usually does fall under that, HR umbrella. So there's no getting away from it. Like it is something that we need to discuss, and I think we'll have a fantastic conversation with Ali on our next episode.
Agreed.
So don't miss it. But that's for now. That's how Lumius uses representation. How we integrate it into our audience analysis. How we use it throughout everything that we do, throughout all of our assets and deliverables and all that kind of stuff. So I appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody.